Hello and welcome to yet another episode of NatStrat Conversations. My name is Pankaj Saran and I warmly welcome you to this episode. In the past, we have been talking about different aspects of national security, geopolitics, technology, etc. Today, we want to talk about economic security and the linkage between economic security and national security. This is a very important aspect of understanding what India is facing and what are the challenges before us. The whole world, in fact, went through a dual shock after the COVID pandemic in 2020 and, of course, the Ukraine conflict last year. And both these events were extremely disruptive, not just for the global economy, but for the Indian economy. And there were many lessons learned which emerged from both these twin shocks. But there is much more to economic security than just dealing with shocks and disruptions. You have to have a long term plan. You have to understand what is in India's interests, what are our objectives, and how do we reinforce ourselves. To discuss all this today, I have a very, very distinguished and special guest who would be the most qualified to talk to us about all these issues. His name is B V R Subrahmanyam. He is a senior IAS officer with an illustrious career. He's held many critical positions in his career, including in the Prime Minister's office, in the World Bank, as Chief Secretary of the sensitive state, or rather Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, as Commerce Secretary, and now he is the Chief Executive Officer or the CEO of the NITI Aayog for the last few months. So there can be no one better qualified than to walk us through the future plans for developing the Indian economic agenda and steeling ourselves to face the myriad kind of risks and challenges that we pose. So welcome, Subbu, to this show, and
Thank
it's
you.
a delight to have you. Thank you very
Pankaj.
much
Thank
for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I want to begin by talking to you a little bit about yourself. Our listeners would be very interested to know, given this profile. So we shouldn't go too back into time, but you were Chief Secretary in Jammu and Kashmir at a critical time. And we know that in the last 4 years, there's been a dramatic change in Kashmir. Tell us, as an insider, what were the main critical elements of change that you oversaw? And how do you read? Are you satisfied with what you see today in Kashmir?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, you said I'm an insider in Kashmir. In the IAS, we belong to cadres, and my cadre has been Madhya Pradesh and later Chhattisgarh.
Right, that's
so, in
true.
a way, on one fine day at midnight, I was told you're going tomorrow to J&K as Chief Secretary. So, in a way, I went there as an outsider, not knowing a single soul. I went into a state with a different constitution, which uses a different language, which is Urdu, which has a different set of rules and laws. They didn't even follow the Indian Penal Code. They have a Ranbir Penal Code. So all the stuff you're trained for your entire life to handle actually went to zero the moment you landed there. First impressions, fantastic place, most beautiful. That's what people who go to Kashmir say. The natural beauty is unrivaled. But the important things you actually learn as you work there, immense diversity. People think of that area as two regions, Jammu and Kashmir. No, it's got as much diversity as India as a nation has. There is no monolithic entity there. You have Gujars, Bakarwals, Pahadis, you have Dogras. It's innumerable. You've got Sikhs, you've got hill people, plains people. It's immensely diverse. And that's something people don't understand or appreciate from outside. The second thing is, Kashmir has actually been ruled by so many people from outside for centuries. The Sikhs ruled them. The Afghans had a kingdom there after Ahmad Shah Abdali left. The Mughals ruled them. So it's a very interesting kind of a dynamic. In fact, Kashmiris started having a government of their own for the first time after 1947. That's a very interesting thing, in fact. So I think it's very important. The second thing is, it's unfortunate we have a neighbor who is very uncomfortable with India's position in Kashmir. So that state has successively suffered from waves of terrorism. 90 to 96, a terrible period. 6 years, the longest period of governor's rule anywhere in the country. And when I went there, I went into a place which for 3 years was literally ungovernable. In 2016, when Burhan Wani died, the secretariat shut down for 3 months. There have been rocket attacks on the secretariat. I think there have been more people from Jammu and Kashmir who have died at the hands of militants than people from outside. People think it's the armed forces or the police who have died. The biggest sufferers have been the people of Kashmir. And one of the first things you realize when you go there, extremely warm people, extremely friendly, completely fed up with their life. Saying 60s was a time when every movie in Bollywood, which was shot in Mumbai, was always shot in J&K. Good old Shammi Kapoor, the Raj Kapoor family, totally in love with Kashmir. Rajesh Khanna, Roti, So every place is marked with memories of Bollywood. You go to Anantnag, near Pahalgam, you have a Betab Valley, you have a Bobby Hut. This is what Kashmir was known for.
Absolutely.
The decline that set in through very sustained attempts to disrupt peace. And it's so sad that the place was going to dog. What has happened? Whatever has happened, the constitutional changes, the transformation that has happened, I think Kashmir has revived phenomenally.
Fantastic.
Ordinary people have risen to the occasion. The important thing is the changes that happened in Kashmir happened without bloodshed. My people have gone around saying, not even one sparrow was killed. The fact is, this is something which shows they were the worry that there would be an uprising or something. People embraced change willingly because they want to get along in life. This is a place which produces world-class doctors, world-class engineers. I'm sure we have businessmen in Kashmir who have factories in Mumbai, in Gujarat, in Hyderabad. And he's also a politician. So they are very well integrated at a different level. So I think that it's for the good. There was a barrier with the rest of the country. The barriers have gone. There is two-way flow of people, capital, and ideas. I mean, the Kashmir was stuck in a different era. The 91 liberalization which had hit India had missed Kashmir. So they were living in a different era. I think that's been brought back. I see a bright future going forward in another 10 years. I'm sure it will be one of the most prosperous regions of India. It will be genuinely the crown jewel of India, the Taj of India.
Fantastic. And I think, you were chief secretary for a long time. So you managed both the law and order, the development, the infrastructure, the legalities. I mean, it was a multi-dimensional approach.
I went there the day the elected government collapsed,
Yeah.
the coalition fell, president's rule was imposed, and I joined next day. I went from Raipur. I was given a very simple brief by the Prime Minister, only two phrases. He says, provide good governance, deliver development. And mark my words, and I can sign on a bond paper. In 3 years, I was not asked to do anything other than these two. That's it. And I asked him, what else? He said, if you have a problem, call me. That's it. And I think the kind of free hand one was given, 3 years plus, which is a very, very long time for chief secretary nowadays. We managed to change the governance styles. We brought in professionalism into the bureaucracy. We implemented, there tons of money has been poured by the government. There's a prime minister's package of almost 90,000 crores. Money was spent very slow. We accelerated. So you have connectivity on most parameters. When the Ayushman Bharat program was introduced in the country, where you get a healthcare card, we were fastest off the blocks. And for a long time, Kashmir was number one in the country.
No, I remember even on power projects. Remember how
the number of power projects which were stuck. So Government of India has been very helpful in the transformation. But I see the economic future bright. A state where for 3 years, 2014 floods and 15, 16, 17 militancy, tourism went for a toss.
That's right.
Last 2 years, you won't get a room in Gulmarg or Pahalgam for money or love. It's impossible. The place has revived like mad. You talk to anybody, we'll meet you next week. Why? I'm going to Kashmir this week. So it's phenomenal. So I think it's all for the good. There's a realization that the future is with India. And I think for whatever is happening on the other side of the frontier, their internal problems, I think problems in Kashmir have come down drastically. So I think that's good for the place and good for the country.
Fantastic. And now from there, you are now occupying another very, very sensitive position. Again, in NITI Aayog, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, and it is the principal policy think tank to guide India into the future and to, in a sense, oversee the economic transformation. So tell me, I mean, when you sit in this building and steer the affairs, how do you see what talked about, the linkage between economic security and India's national security? And how are you, so how do you plan to move forward in terms of strengthening India's, let us say, comprehensive national power? Because obviously security is a multi-dimensional issue. It's not just defense or hard security. There are many, many other aspects, and economic is clearly one of them. And we discussed some of these elements. So would you like to briefly spell out, and then we can discuss more specific and micro issues?
Yeah. I mean, modern wars are not wars of the Middle Ages. It's not two armies fighting and the rest of the people sitting on the sidelines and clapping hands and waiting for the winner.
Sure.
Two countries go to war, the two economies go to war. Your capacity to engage in war
Yeah.
depends on the strength of
Yeah.
your economy. I go to the example of First World War. I think Germany was not easy to defeat militarily. They collapsed economically. So that's why till 2000, till 1918, Germany was not on the back foot and there was no movement. But suddenly it collapsed internally and then they lost the war. So I think it's important that without a strong economy, you cannot be a strong country, both diplomatically as well as militarily. We are not an aggressive nation, but we need to secure our borders. And we are not in a very comfortable environment, to put it mildly.
Sure.
And somebody said, you don't choose your neighbors just
Absolutely.
as you don't choose your parents. So we are blessed to be in a location where you are got friends, neighbors with whom you have problems of many types. And I think without a strong economy, which is resilient, strong, can stand up to challenges and to crisis, it'll be difficult for India to defend itself for a prolonged period. And therefore, it's important that we strengthen the economic security for the country. And economic security has multiple dimensions. You can't be a one-trick pony. You need to have an economy which is diverse.
Right.
Two, you need to have a strong industrial base. And the industrial base would include a defense base, but also a strong non-defense base. You need energy security because the economy thrives on energy. It's driven by energy. So you need to have strong that. You need to have strong infrastructure for transport and logistics, both internal as well as external. I mean, the British railway lines in India were laid with half an eye on the defense potential. I mean, it's something, somebody interested in Indian History of Railways, all the broad gauge lines just avoided the Indian Maharajas. So Hyderabad is meter gauge, Bangalore is meter gauge, entire Rajputana meter gauge, entire Gujarat meter gauge. All the broad gauge went through their territory. Indore meter gauge. It's a very clever way. So I move my troops on trains. The others don't have a national access. So the kings can't combine. So this is strategic thinking. So in economics also, the country which is rising is the world's fifth largest economy, but we also need to have a strategic perspective. In major important sectors, we should be strong. I'm not saying self-reliant, but we should de-risk ourselves from situations where we become vulnerable and move ahead.
So the lessons from COVID and Ukraine, we face so many shocks across the economy in different states of the country. Clearly, we have internalized those lessons and we are moving forward. So specifically, what are the areas? I mean, you talked about all these specifics, but also, human capacity, HR, the quality of your workforce, etc., regional imbalances, allowing the states to flourish, prosper. You talked about the manufacturing sector. These are all very complex issues. So, do you have a set of priorities?
Okay, let me just, I mean, for your
From
viewers'
NITI
sake,
Aayog
from your
or
viewers'
what
point
is
of view,
yeah.
what does NITI Aayog do? I
Yeah,
mean, okay,
correct.
I'll put it. My governing council has the prime minister
Yeah.
and all the chief ministers and half a dozen ministers, finance, defense, home, etc. So in a way, it's a platform where the political leadership of the country at the national level and at the state level get together to discuss issues. The good thing, our prime minister sets agendas which are common to the whole country. We met in May and we were discussing things like a vision for India in 2047. What are the skills? How do we improve the status of women? How can we have women-led development? So these are the issues on which we discuss. That's one. We have two roles. We are the think tank for the government. Issues other than pure security issues, which are handled by the National Security Council. And we work with states to help them rise economically on specific issues. in this process, currently we're in the process of preparing a vision for 2047. Don't have the details because it's in the pipeline, but this is a process which has been going on for a year. There have been 10 groups of secretaries who have been working to prepare sectoral vision plans: business and finance, commerce and trade, social sector, security, resources. They've been preparing. We're trying to integrate that into one whole and come out with a national vision, which we will then discuss both with the government and with the other stakeholders, industry, other stakeholders, academics, and then probably the Prime Minister will unveil it. But the vision is not for tomorrow. It's for 2047. It's 25 years. And that's what NITI is uniquely equipped. India in 2047 is going to be a completely different country than what we can imagine.
So let me stop you there. How much buy-in do you have from the states to the vision and to the need for the vision?
Okay. I just flew in yesterday from Visakhapatnam. I was there all day. We are preparing a vision for the country, and we are helping two states prepare a vision. One is Gujarat, and the other is Andhra Pradesh. One is ruled by the central party,
right.
which is at the center, and there you have a party which is not a party of the government in Delhi. We have excellent relations in most parts of India. I run an aspirational district program, 112 districts, and an aspirational block program, 500 blocks, 350 districts. That's half of India. So that's spread all over. In 50-60% of the places, I run into governments run by the ruling party in Delhi. In the other 40-50%, I run into governments which are not run by the ruling party. Excellent reception. The simple point is, development is non-partisan. Who can say, I don't want schools, don't want hospitals, I don't want development, I don't want jobs, I don't want industries. So to that extent, I think NITI Aayog's acceptability is very high. And I think that's the way the Prime Minister pitches the body. So when we have a vision, it can't be a vision for one part of India and not for the other part of India.
No, that's true.
So it will be a universal vision.
But when we were talking outside, you told me very rightly that once the country or the economy moves from a low level to a higher level or a mid-level, the demands of governance and requirements of how you approach problems or even think bigger change. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the mindset.
Let me give you some data points, because that point we have crossed in preparing the vision, so that then I can answer your question better. What will India look like in 2047?
Exactly.
It will be having a population of about 150 crores. Okay, we probably stabilize at about that number. We're about 130 crores now, and I think in about 10 years we will peak and then be stable for a while. We'll have a per capita GDP of about $20,000. It's a matter of arithmetic. You multiply the two, the size of the economy will be about $30 trillion in a base case. You're not talking about the best case.
And this is a growth rate of per annum?
Yeah, about 7.5 to 8%, which is imminently doable. $30 trillion is more than the size of the US economy today. That is the India of 2047. It's going to be a country where you will not have problems like drinking water, food scarcity, electricity not being there, road connectivity not. It's going to be a very different country. It'll be a developed country. And that's where I come to this question which you raised. For the last 75 years, we have been addressing issues of basic services to our people.
Correct.
Access to schools, access to hospitals, primary health care, diseases which cause morbidity like malaria, tuberculosis, building roads because a lot of India was not connected. People didn't have bank accounts. There is no electricity supply to most households. We didn't have food security for most households. This was what, roti, kapda, makan, as would say, these were the issues.
Correct.
Thankfully, and particularly because of the acceleration in the last 9 years, we are close to licking the problem. We have universal coverage with electricity. We have universal coverage with bank accounts. We have universal coverage with toilets, which means there's no open defecation. We are on the last mile in delivering water supply. We are almost there as far as covering every village in the country with roads is concerned. So in a year or two, the problems of the last century are going to be over. And that's where I think there's a big challenge for government. We have all been trained. I have spent 35 years handling those problems. Correct. So my strength or core competence is to address those. But as we now move out of that, we'll be faced with a new set of problems. It's not that advanced or developed countries don't have challenges, but the challenges of a developed country are radically different from the challenges of a less developed country. The second part of the problem is the solutions for a developed country are going to be radically different. So our gut reaction is very statist, a command and control, rush into a thing and do some, stop a school because we need to, do some relief work and we need to use the teachers. There's going to be a situation we're going to say, we can't close schools. We'll have to do things some other way. Yeah. We'll have to depend on private market forces for solutions. Yeah. We have to realize the importance of markets and other things. And I think our bureaucracy has to be trained for that. The government will have to be restructured for that. We no longer be worried about malaria and immunization. We'll be worried about people are going to live to be 90, 95, 100. We are going to look at geriatric care, old age care. So it has to be a transformation. It's going to be probably the major challenge, and I think NITI is working on that.
So the evolution of institutions, and governance structures and mentality.
I would give an example. I mean, you come from the foreign service, you spent your whole career there. India's diplomacy in the 40s and 50s and 60s is radically different from what it is today. It's a different context. You're the fifth largest economy. You are at the high table now in every forum. We just had the G20 and it was a thundering success. Who thought anybody could have pulled off a communique by consensus in today's times? And a lot of people are giving credit to a prime minister in India that we could pull it off because we are seen as...
Because we are India.
We are India, and you straddle both worlds. You are a big economy, but you also empathize with the developing world because you were one till a little while ago. So that helped us a lot.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I've written about it, and I agree with you on the success of the G20 entire presidency.
Right.
But you mentioned a little bit about the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector. The fact that you're still 16% of GDP only for manufacturing. How are you going to, is that a plan to step up the manufacturing capabilities within India or are we going to, there's this debate that we are good enough as a services economy, we don't need manufacturing. But sometimes it does seem you need to have the manufacturing muscle, like we are seeing in the case of, for example, China.
Yeah. So it's one of the sad things with the Indian economy. In the first 50, 60 years, we have not had the manufacturing boom, which all rapidly developing countries have managed. East Asia, Southeast Asia. Exactly. They have actually used manufacturing to pull people out of agriculture. While we have had growth and our industry has grown, it's been not created the kind of jobs which are required to pull people out of agriculture. So where you have agriculture with still about 15% of our GDP, you still have 60% of the people working in agriculture, which means low productive jobs, not that paying, not that rich. So I think that's a bus we missed. We can't afford to miss. Now, we are not in a benign world environment where people are going to allow you to export your way to success. So we have to do it ourselves. And I don't think the government is not concerned. I mean, you have the Make in India program, you have the PLI scheme, 2 lakh crores, 2 trillion rupees has been put on the table. Never in the history of India has so much money been put on the table for subsidies for manufacturing. And this is trade. Right. 2, we have got away from the past, ideologies. No, we never supported big business. Correct. We always supported small industry. For the first time in PLI, you give money for scale. So, and without scale, you don't become global, you don't compete, you don't get economies of scale, etc. So I think that is there. There's a concerted effort. But let me put a word of caution. We will be a big power in manufacturing. We are in a sweet spot in 3-4 ways. Chinese population has peaked. 50, 60 years from now, they're going to be about 900 million. So it's actually going to be a very different China next door. So India is going to be the biggest supplier of manpower, and manufacturing needs people. In about 6-7 years, 1/5 of the world's working age population is in India. So we're going to use that. However, increasingly manufacturing is getting automated. So while it adds to value, will it create the number of jobs? We don't know. So I think services will provide jobs. There are 2 phenomena which are happening in parallel. Manufacturing, we use the word servicification of manufacturing. A lot of services are embedded in manufacturing. When you buy a mobile phone, the cardboard, the packing, the labeling, the shipping, it's all included in the cost. But that's actually services. So you're counting services as a part of manufacturing. That's one part. The second is India is about 3.5% of the world GDP. Our share of world trade is about 2.5 to 3%. share of services trade is 8%. We have a huge competitive advantage in services. In the morning when we were working on this visioning, we were looking at it. India is no longer seen as a place which provides, white collar labor for IT. We have now, it's no longer the BPO stuff. It's called Global Capability Centers, GCCs. There are 1,600 of them. So GM and Ford may have pulled out of India, but the cars are being designed in India. So you're doing the R&D for Microsoft, for Google. These are high value jobs. You're producing the second largest number of engineers in the world after China. We have more STEM graduates than any other country. 50% of whom are women. You could see that in our Chandrayaan, etc. So this is going to be the skill back room of the world in tech. And the future is all tech, be it AI, be it, then it's very disruptive.
But I want to ask you another thing while we're talking about the geopolitics of it, on China. I mean, frankly, every Indian strategic expert and commentator is talking about China and the power differential and the Indian dependency on China for certain sectors and certain kinds of trade. And all the projections that you have mentioned, China is also going to grow. Now, it's not so important what the power differential will be 20 years later or 25 years later. The question is today, do we have a vision or do we have a plan in mind about the kind of economic and trade relationship we have with China? I mean, is it reinforcing our development and economic plans, or is it taking away from those plans? And there are things like domination in some sectors of the economy, strategic sectors, which we are now addressing very seriously. There is also this whole serious issue about the trade imbalance, etc. So we talked about it a little bit outside, and in fact, even the United States and so on. So, any thoughts?
Okay, it's a very complex issue, but let me lay it out this way. For about 200-300 years, our economy was slightly bigger than China's. I was recently seeing a time and motion video on the Indian economy and the Chinese economy. They went ahead of us somewhere in the 60s. We again got ahead of them. As late as 1983, the Indian and the Chinese economies were the same in size. And then you see the acceleration they had. Correct. Sustained growth of 8 to 10% from 1980, about 40 years. So they're about roughly 5 times the size. We're about 3.5 trillion. Yeah. They're close to 18 trillion. Correct. So let's admit it. Correct. They are big. Correct. 2, they're second only to the United States. So Correct. They cannot be ignored. 3, they have specialized particularly in manufacturing, and they're 1/4 of the world's manufacturing is in China. So the world's dependence on China, not just India's, is quite large. Having said that, we need to see what are the challenges, etc. One point, a couple of things to note. China is not going to grow as fast in future. 2 big trends. A, the population is declining. A declining band, it's a consequence of their one-child policy. Yeah. People have now cost of bringing up children, all that. A declining population means your savings rate goes down. Savings in China were at 50% of GDP. They were driving their growth because it was cheap money invested at very low rates. That's why you have ghost cities, bridges and roads to nowhere. You can fund it with your own money. All that is going to vanish. The old economic paradigm in China is broken. There's universal consensus that if they're going to grow at even 3 to 4% for the next decade or two, it's going to be a miracle. Having said that, we have to admit there are 5 times. The big thing which the world is talking about is no longer decoupling from China. Can the first and the second largest economies in the world decouple? I don't foresee. You're right. What they're going to do is de-risk. And I think that means A, let China not be the only source of supply for anything. Let there be at least 2. That's why we call it China plus 1. Now that's a sweet spot for India. Because in terms of size, I'm sure you're hearing a lot that a lot of the Chinese stuff moving out is going to Vietnam or to Malaysia or Indonesia. But what's it? Vietnam, 78 million, 90 million. Thailand, 70 million. No, they're already saturated. You're the only people with $1 billion plus. So it will come to India. You've got Apple coming in here. You've got others. They will all move into India. There's no escape, which of course requires a right set of policies. We have done very little to attract Chinese outflows, companies coming out of China. We need to do much more, actually target specific companies. If I had the choice, I will actually do a roadshow in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen, and say, come to India, move your factory here. And I'm telling you, people are waiting. That's one. The second, we also need to de-risk. heavily from China. And we need to do it very systematically. Strategic sectors. Firstly, anything to do with defense, military, etc., I think it's a complete no-go. There should be no supply line which goes back to China.
No, even
We
cyber,
sometimes,
telecom.
yeah, not only that, we think we have moved away from China to Vietnam or Malaysia. You realize that they are sourcing from China. So we actually have to trace the entire supply chain to see nothing comes from China, because then you will be stuck. Your neck is in their hands. Then the second thing, in other areas, I don't think it's going to be decoupling, because China is increasingly, let me tell you, there was a presentation again in the morning on energy. If you look at the concentration of fossil fuels, 10 countries dominate. If you look at concentration of non-renewable suppliers, it's 3 countries. And China is half of it. Because for entire EV, all the metals, etc., that are required, they're all in, either they're in China or the entire processing happens in China, even if it's in some other country, South Africa. They've already become dominant. So I think it's important that we develop alternate sources. I'm not saying don't buy from China, but have a China plus fund even for our own trade purposes. The third thing is, are we going to get a lot of stuff from China coming in? It's inevitable. A country with 25% of manufacturing of the world will be selling something. A trade deficit China for us is actually mirrors a trade surplus of India with America. Because what we sell to America, a lot of the raw material comes from China. That is a healthy thing which should be promoted. What we need to be careful is dependence. In commerce, we produce
unnatural or abnormal dependence.
As I said, we both export and import. You see, in exports also, there's a commerce, there was a study which was done. What are the products where 50% plus exports go to 1 or 2 countries? There are about 1,000 items where you're totally dependent on 1 or 2 countries for your own exports. And on imports, products for which more than 50% come from either 1 or 2 countries. Massive. And China is there everywhere. So I think we need to make that 2 into 4 countries or 5 countries. Then if say 20-25% of something comes from China, it shouldn't bother us. Are we in a position to press China through, cutting off trade, etc.? We are less than 2% of China's exports. So I don't think we can squeeze China. So I think we shouldn't bother about squeezing China. We should bother about securing ourselves.
I think that's
the right approach.
Exactly. I don't think that's not the intention of policy. Intention of policy is to promote your own, build your own comprehensive national power.
So I think the Prime Minister's push towards a semiconductor manufacturing.
Exactly.
It's a classic case. I mean, the Chinese stopped supplying chips. Forget defense. We couldn't produce cars. 2 years ago, there's a wait list for cars and scooters because the chips were coming from China. I mean, that's probably not acceptable. That's why the Americans went for that Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act.
So, if some of the American presidential candidates have spoken about ensuring semiconductor independence for the United States, because they are also worried about this strong dependency. So I think from a long-term point of view, when you are looking at a more strategic and a visionary in a visionary manner for the Indian economy, I think these are some of the principal issues, right? Trade-offs that you have to make.
There is no escape.
Because you can't outsource manufacturing also to China. The West and the Americans did it, and today they're paying the price for it.
They've created a level of dependence. You see, they thought that by opening up their markets to China, they will change China, which probably didn't happen. And I think they're regretting that. The entry to the WTO was a one-way street for China. But the point is, I think there's a realization across the world about this. And given that and their generally muscular approach to bilateral relations across the entire region and the world, I think is making people slightly wary. The good thing is, you mentioned about US wanting to be independent in semiconductor. It's going to be great opportunities for India. I was reading somewhere. United States produce only 60,000 engineers. Semiconductor production requires a large number of engineers. Their colleges don't produce any more graduates in those numbers. So it's going to be a huge opportunity for Indian engineers to run those semiconductor plants in the US. 2, this new stuff where the US now is treating India as a trusted supplier will open up huge opportunities. So I see that India is now going to be a part of the global value chains where you may not be doing everything, but you will get something from Malaysia, you make it here, you pass it on to a third country, comes back to us, then goes to America. We're going to be a part of that.
Great. I think so. Actually, it's going to be a full vertical integration starting from the district level in India to get that little factory and the manufacturing unit and the right colleges and the right engineers. at the district level, what you're doing at the block level and district level, going up right up to the global level. So the whole thing is linked up. And you have to get the states to then think and act the way NITI Aayog would like them, and to see paint the picture on the wall and say, look, this is where we want to be. And you have to pitch and make it easy for everything.
As I speak, we are preparing state visions for Gujarat, Andhra, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu are preparing their own visions. My goal is by December, every state should be working on a vision. I don't mind how crazy they are. The point is, vision means you're looking beyond the horizon and then planning towards it. It brings a sense into a lot of our day-to-day activities.
Exactly.
I think that's important, number one.
Correct.
Number two,
Correct.
we are at a very interesting time in history. Our development trajectory is about to change. It's a cusp of change which will play out in the next decade or two. But the seeds for that have to be sown now. Because these things, as I was saying, governance needs to be reformed.
Yes.
Reform in government doesn't take place overnight.
Correct.
But if you don't put the right institutions now in place, the right policies, we'll get stuck in a middle income trap.
Correct.
And that's the danger India needs to avoid. I think the next 10 years we'll have a fabulous run. But if we don't do the right things now, after 10 years, most of Latin America has got stuck in a middle income trap. Argentina was as rich as Europe at the turn of the last century.
Absolutely.
Where is it now? It's a basket case. So the good thing is the government is thinking about these things. And I'm sure the kind of stuff that's being rolled out will reach the goal of being a developed nation.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Subbu, for spending time with us. And viewers, I think we've had an absolutely fantastic discussion on how the mind of the CEO of the NITI Aayog is working in terms of his own vision, in terms of the government's vision to take India towards 2047. Clearly, according to the CEO, India is ambitious, it has a vision, and there is a lot of optimism about the future trajectory of the economy, which will lead to not just economic security, but achieving comprehensive national power in the truest sense. So with these words, thank you so much for joining us. Till we meet again for our next episode. Thank you. Please join us and continue to follow us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.